And incidentally, the first speaker, even though very briefly, is myself. So I'm going to have to try and start delivering myself. And we did 2 mentees. We're going to try a different thing also. It's old-fashioned, but it works greatly usually. It's just hands up. Who here is not Swedish? And who here is Swedish? So there's a 60-40 or 65-35 divide, and then there were several people who actually voted twice, which is a good thing. You feel that you're both from elsewhere and from here. That's the Swedish spirit beginning to grow on you. But let me direct myself mainly towards those of you who are not Swedish and give you a very brief introduction to Sweden as the introductory remarks for this conference. Sweden is a tiny country. In fact, in one of the areas that I focus on the most, and the areas that I know that many of you feel as being tremendously important, climate, Sweden's emissions are tiny. So if we look at the world as 100%, of course, of global emissions, how much would Sweden's be? The world is 100%. Sweden's emission, how many percent? What was that? 1. That's a great guess. Thank you. We need to go further down for 1%. 0.5, we need to go further down. Come on, another guess? 0.2, who said that? You win the nearest guess award. So 0.2% in current terms, Swedish emissions of the global total of climate impact is 0.15%. But then you can add stuff that's not technically Sweden's emissions, it's somebody else's. Like this suit was maybe made in Thailand, this watch probably in Switzerland, this computer maybe in China, but all used in Sweden, so maybe it's our emissions anyway, and then it adds up to 0.3. But that's still so little, so that if Sweden theoretically were to reduce our emissions now to 0, secretly, nobody would be able to notice. Those sort of global CO2 impact assessors around the world would not notice. So if we were to shut off every factory, shut off every engine, breathe in, and then don't breathe out again, the world would not notice. And as most of us know, there's 8 parties in parliament. One of them is more focused on other issues, but the other 7 parties, they got together and said, well, we want to find a way to formulate Sweden's climate targets. And then they posed the exact same question as I did, but to begin with, how big are our emissions? And when they realized that they're just 0.15%, they could easily have said, well, so it doesn't really matter then. But what they said was the exact opposite. They said, well, if our emissions are so small in a global scope, the only way we can make a difference is by being so great so that others will learn from us, from what we're doing, so that we can become the global help desk to call, so that we can become the permanent world exhibition to visit. And that is what became the climate law, the 1st of January this year, that by 2030, we're going to have a 70% emissions reduction compared to 2010 in the transport sector. I know that some of you work with transports. We're going to hear some things related to transport during the day. And by 2045, when many of you students at least will still be active, we are supposed to have net zero in Sweden's emissions. You know that every country in the Paris agreements had to deliver their climate proposals, which means that we can compare, and we know that Sweden's climate emission targets are the toughest in the world. As a lot of us know, probably all of us know, we had elections just very recently, and then you know that of all the issues that were discussed in the elections, if you were to believe Donald Trump, you would expect people to say, well, safety, security, violence, that's the main issue that we need to discuss in these elections. But the number one climber, and at the end of the election period, the single most important issue that we as voters said, this is what we need to discuss in Sweden, was climate. That was of course influenced by the record summer that we had. Not only record heat, but also record with how much the record was broken compared to the previous record. The droughts, the fires, the emergency slaughtering of the animals, and the very poor harvest that we're starting to see now. And then we had the election day on the 9th of September. Then many people said, well, on election day, people left climate at home because those parties that had a very strong climate profile maybe didn't do all that well. And when you asked the voters, when they left the polling station, what made you decide on which party to vote for? Climate was not on top, but at the very bottom. Number 17 out of 17 different issues discussed. So did people really leave climate at home? No, it's the opposite. When people said climate is the most important thing that we need to discuss and that politics need to deliver on, and they said it's the least important least determining factor when I get to decide whom to vote for. In fact, they're saying politicians of every party, well, maybe all 7 parties, maybe not the 8th one, of every party, we have faith in you. We have trust that you're going to be able to deliver on this. And as you know, we had the IPCC report last week on how we need to reduce our emissions very quickly, how we need much more science, much more innovation to start now to get to a point where we can stop global warming at 1.5 degrees, because if we can't stop it at 1.5, the risk is very high that we cannot stop it at 2, 3, 4 degrees, because then we have the runaway train. Then we have irreversible effects that we can no longer control. So we need to stop it at 1.5, and they said it on Monday, last Monday. Last Tuesday, exactly a week from now, there was the EU meeting on climate and environment. The Swedish climate minister went there to say, we need to have stronger, tougher EU legislation on reducing emissions, as the EU's proposal for the global climate negotiations in Katowice in Poland in December. And the environmental minister Skog, she went also to Brussels, but to a different meeting, saying that the automotive sector needs to reduce their emissions much faster, because otherwise we're not going to reach the 1.5 degree target. Now, some of you might object to what I just said. The climate minister Lövin, the environment minister Skog, there's no such thing. We don't even have a government in Sweden for the time being. We are about to break the European record. We'll see what happens, but we're now 4 weeks into a period of non-government. We only have an expeditionsminister. I'm not sure what that is in English, but it's a sort of in between governments that can only do things that are necessary, self-evident, and cannot wait. And if they do anything else more than that, other parties will immediately object and say, you're not allowed to do that because you're not a proper government. You can only do what's necessary, self-evident, and cannot wait. So when the 2 ministers went and said we need to reduce our emissions and we need to increase our targets, and nobody objected. Everybody said that's fine, even though you're not a government, that's the right thing to do. That just proves that in Sweden, all parties agree that we need to have a much more stringent climate policy. And it proves that we still don't know who won the election, but we certainly know which issue won. It was the climate issue, and it was the science and innovation touch of things, because that's the only way to reach those targets. Now remember, if we want to be the global help desk, and 7 parties out of 8 agree that from year to year, all the way to 2045, that's what we're going to be. The global help desk, the permanent exhibition. We're not North Korea. So we cannot have that everybody walks in the exact same pace. If Sweden is going to be the global help desk permanent exhibition, somebody in Sweden needs to move faster than the others. And Sweden is such a tiny country, so they can easily be one of us here. It can easily be Mittuniversitetet among the universities. Those of you representing companies, it can easily be your companies showing the way. Those of you representing municipalities, why should your municipality not be the leading municipality in Sweden? And if you're the leading municipality in Sweden, which wants to be the country that leads the world, well, then we become globally relevant. So that's my introductory remarks, that we may think of ourselves as people in a medium-sized university or medium or small-sized company in a small country. But when we flip that coin, we realize we also have a unique possibility to show the world the way. And when we want to show the world the way, we realize also that the IPCC said that can only be done by unprecedented action, which means that we need more science and more innovation, which means that we're at the exact right place at the exact right moment Thank you so much. And I'm glad you noticed this is more of a trial, because we're going to have longer speakers afterwards with 10 full 10 minutes for questions. We don't have time for much questions now, which is great. That's just free. But it also proves that we are starting to understand how this works. Is the vision for the future society clear? Of course it's not. And I'm glad it's not, because the only thing we know about the future is that it's difficult to predict. And when we try, we often end up wrong. But we're going to get some great impact to have a more clear vision, at least of the future that we want. Do you think that we can stop the increasing global warming? Yes, I think we can. I was watching Germany beat Sweden 4-0, 65th minute. If we were not at least playing equal with Germany, we would not go to the World Championship. And all the others, they left the room. They said there's no chance. That was 4-0. And then Sweden scored 1, 2, 3, 4. We qualified and we reached the quarterfinals, because we will rise to the occasion. We will do it on stoppage time. We will do it with impact that we need to deliver on, but we will do it at the last minute. What if we engage many sectors of society to take action for urgent environment needs? Yes, please. We're going to discuss not only environment today, but environment is going to be one of the top of minds here when we see how can we engage science, business, and research and policy better. So we're going to keep that for us during the rest of the day.